Weekend. I am so thankful for our student leaders, for Ian and his planning of our D-Now weekend. All of those in matching shirts, those are the ones who've been a part of D-Now this weekend, and they look a little extra tired from this past weekend, but so grateful for how God moved and what He's doing in our student ministry. I'm especially thankful on D-Now weekend for all of our college students who come back and help lead and run small groups, and it has just been great seeing them in the hallways again. Many of them came up through our student ministry, and so it's just been wonderful seeing them back in our hallway, and we look forward to what God's doing in their life while they're at college. I have a chair today. Some of you know, every couple of years, I go through a bout with low back pain, which is a lot of fun, and started Monday, and so maybe back and forth and moving around just a little bit. I would love to tell you that it happened while I was rappelling down a mountainside. I was deadlifting 1,000 pounds, a new personal record, but no, I was putting on a sock. Putting on a sock. And here we are. We are wrapping up this series, Right Where You Belong. And I'm grateful for how God has spoken to our church. Last week we kind of walked through the beginnings of our church. 10 years ago, March 8th, was the first time we had a service. We didn't call ourselves a church at the time. We weren't a church at the time, but 10 years ago, March 8th, we had a service. I still remember, I meant to mention this last week, I still remember the first words I said to that group on March 8th. I came out and I stood in front of everybody, and the first words out of my mouth were, "You really came." And seeing a room full, albeit a small room, but a room full of people who had come just to be together, to be with the Lord. And I have that feeling pretty much every Sunday. You really came. A night of storms last night, D-Now weekend, and you really came. You know, we just sang, may we never lose the wonder of God's presence, and that's true. May we always be excited to meet with God, but I don't want to ever lose the wonder of being with all of you, of us sharing our lives together, of us worshiping together, and getting to know each other, and praying for one another, and encouraging one another. That's a little bit of what this series has tried to encourage us to do. Is that we need each other. We were made for each other. It's not good for any of us to be alone to try to live our personal lives, or certainly our spiritual lives, in isolation. We said from last week's message that we are holding a seat for you. We're holding space, not just physical space in our church, but relational space in our lives for one another. And we talked about Paul's words, and I just want to read them again from Ephesians 4. As a prisoner of the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. We talked about this oneness last week, that this encouragement is relational, that you don't really get to practice patience until you're in relationship with another person. You don't get to really practice being gentle or being humble until you put your life next to somebody else's life. You certainly can't bear with another person unless there is an other. Right? All of the one another's of the Bible, they require an other. They require you to be in relationship with someone in order to carry them out. We can't forgive one another unless there's an other to forgive. We can't love one another unless there's an other that we're in relationship with to love. So this belonging and connecting, this oneness, as Paul put it, is vital to our spiritual lives. I want to take some more time on this phrase that Paul uses. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Make every effort to keep the unity. And he's in some ways talking about church unity, but church unity is dependent upon individual unity between the members of the church. And Paul is very honest. He says that takes some work. Connecting takes some work on our part. Belonging takes some effort on our part. Being united, being one, it takes not just a season of work and then we never have to worry about it again. It takes this ongoing effort for us to stay connected to one another in the bond of peace. And I'm going to spend most of this message talking about what I would call kind of an outward effort, that while we as a church have a responsibility to do everything we can to make our church a place that feels like family, a place where you can belong, a place where new people can come in and connect, I want to spend just a minute talking about more of an inward effort that is necessary. And what I mean is my willingness to work on the parts of me that sometimes make it challenging for people to connect with me, right? At the risk of making people mad in this section, I want to talk about you for a minute. I'm going to talk about me for a minute. I am not making eye contact with anybody on purpose during this section, okay? I am not. It's not on purpose. But part of the making effort is I have to ask myself, what about me for people to connect with me? I have met people, love people, want the best for some people who want to belong, who want to connect, but are unwilling to deal with the challenges that they present to people when it comes to connecting. They're unwilling to say, God, deal with these parts of me that cause me to push people away, that cause me to be difficult to get close to. God, there's some of me that needs some work so that I can feel like I belong. Again, I pray for, I love some people who desperately desire to do the right things to connect within a body, connect within a group, but they're not always willing to say, look, there's something in me that I need the Lord's help with because it's keeping other people from connecting to me. Now, I'm not saying anybody has to be perfect to connect, because none of us are perfect. I am reminding us we are to be patient with one another. We are to bear with one another. We are to be gentle and humble towards one another. That side of the street definitely should be flowing. But again, at the risk of making you mad, sometimes the connection piece is there are habits in me, there are attitudes in me that I need the Lord to work on so that I can have this sense of connecting. One of our little slogans here at Journey is we are real people and we serve a real God and we live it out in the real world. This is part of real right here. Okay? This is real talk to say, come on, we all have stuff that make us a little prickly sometimes. We have things that stiff-arm other people about us. There are characteristics maybe that keep other people at a distance. When Paul says make every effort, Yes, he's talking about the outward effort of moving towards community, but I think we can also say he's talking about that effort that's required inside of me so that I become connectable. That's a word, right? I become connectable. I become a person that others can be with, can feel at home with. Make every effort. Now, this make every effort idea, in general, I think is a challenge for us. And we'll talk about a couple of challenges when it comes to belonging. One of them is this inward work that sometimes God needs to do in us. Another challenge is we tend to think connection and belonging will just happen. They're just supposed to happen. I'm supposed to show up, and it's just supposed to happen. I'm just supposed to know it, and it's supposed to happen with minimal effort. I just show up, and boom, I'm connected, and I belong, and it's just supposed to happen. So sometimes I think even we're waiting for the feeling of connection without making efforts to connect. It's just supposed to come over us. Now, we spent all last week, if you weren't here last week, we spent all last week saying we, who are part of this church, part of this body, we have great responsibility in helping people connect and making people feel at home. We said the belongers, the people who already feel like they belong in this family, we have a responsibility to people who are new to try and help them belong. But sometimes we have this idea in the time that we live in that we show up and it's just supposed to happen. I'm just supposed to belong. I'm supposed to feel it with minimal effort. It's just supposed to happen. Someone is supposed to show up and take me by the hand and introduce me to 10 people who all are just like me. And they see the world like me, and we just hit it off just like that. And they invite me to dinner, and pretty soon we're planning a vacation together. Like it's just supposed to drop down and happen. Unless you don't want to be introduced to 10 people. Then we're supposed to leave you alone and allow you your anonymity and not ever get in your space and definitely not plan a vacation with you, but still make you feel connected. Humans are hard. Humans are challenging because we think it's just supposed to happen. Or we think, I don't want to meet anybody, but I want to feel connected. Like Paul says, look, you gotta make every effort. You've got to move forward. In this time of this age of isolation, as it has been called, sometimes it takes extra effort on our parts. Right? Here's a related challenge that we face. Entering a new environment always has a measure of discomfort. Or whatever the environment is, certainly a new church. Entering into a new environment, we cannot erase the little bit of discomfort or the lot of bit of discomfort that comes with stepping into a new environment. In a time when people relocate frequently, in a time when people move from one part of Atlanta to another part and move out here, they leave a church that they loved, or they decide they want to start going to a church. It is just simply a reality that every time we try to cross that border of a new place, there is going to be some discomfort, and it really can't be eliminated. We talked about it in week 1. Remember we talked about remembering your first day at a new school and how awkward and uncomfortable that felt. Your first day on a new job, like you just feel that sense of discomfort. The first time you meet your girlfriend's parents, like that you can't erase discomfort from stepping into a new environment. And part of this making every effort is realizing, it's not going to feel at home at first, but there are people that I need to connect with. And environment has its share of discomfort, but I would say every time you step further into an environment, there's discomfort. If you come to our church and worship begins to feel comfortable, it's like, okay, I get it. I know the songs now. I see some people and I say hello. If you step into a community group, like that's another step of discomfort. Like this is a new thing. And then if you step into a community group and you think, well, that group wasn't quite right for me, I need to step into another one, okay? Well, then that's another layer of discomfort. If you step into serving, there's that new step for you. And it's a little uncomfortable to show up and, I mean, you know how to make coffee, but you don't know how we make coffee. And you don't know what the process is. And you know how to greet people, but you don't know what the protocol is. And we try to do our best to break those things down and make it as easy as possible. All I'm saying is, every time you take another step towards community, towards a group, towards a new environment, there's at least a little element of discomfort, and Paul would tell you, make the effort. Make the effort. Take the step. Yeah, it's not going to feel comfortable at first. Take the step. And yes, on our end, it is our job to try to make it as smooth and easy as possible. But make the effort. Take the step. And look, I want to be sensitive to the fact that we have very different personalities. We have the ranges of introvertedness and extrovertedness. That is true. That is real. We acknowledge that. I want to acknowledge the fact that there are people that do struggle with some anxiety, whether that's with groups or whether that's in general or whether that's other issues. Those are real. We are not minimizing that. We're not trying to make everybody the same, but we are trying to say, your spiritual growth, your personal fulfillment will be so much greater to the degree that you just keep taking another step to belong, to connect, to be in community. Another challenge. A world of superficial or non-spiritual connecting. Two different things. A world of superficial, okay? There are huge benefits to social media. Huge benefit. Okay, there's some benefits to social media. There are people that I grew up with, I went to high school with, I went to elementary school with. I would know nothing of their lives were it not for social media. It's nice to peek into their life every once in a while to see what they do for a living, who their kids are, where they live. It's nice to have that sort of social media connection, which is not a real, authentic connection, but I'm not saying there's no benefit. It's just not the same benefit as sitting eye to eye with someone and face to face with someone and knee to knee with someone. And no matter how we rationalize it, you will never have the benefits of that relationship via a digital format. You just won't. Well, we are inundated with these superficial, can only go so far ways of connecting, and we can live our lives in those if we're not careful. Not only superficial connections, but non-spiritual connections. You hopefully have connections with people in your neighborhood. Hopefully you do. Hopefully you have connections with the parents of your kids' friends. The parents of the kids on your kids' team. Those are wonderful relationships. Those are wonderful connections. We need those connections. We need connections outside of church. I don't want to be misunderstood. We need connections with unbelievers. We should be friends with unbelievers. We should be praying for them and encouraging them and listening to them and learning their perspective and looking for opportunities to share our faith. Our whole world should not be built around just spiritual connections, But you and I need spiritual connections. We need it. It's not an add-on. It's not a plus. You and I need the connection and encouragement and prayer that only comes when we are connected to other people who share our faith, who will encourage us spiritually, who will walk with us through good times and hard times, who will point us to Christ. So yes, be friends with the other parents on the travel ball team. Wonderful. What I'm saying is there is a unique relationship between people who are pursuing the Lord together, who are walking with Jesus together. You need to. Don't let other things substitute for that. Here's a truth. God often does His greatest work in us through relationships. God often accomplishes His greatest work in us through relationships. I want to give you an example. We're going to be in Acts chapter 10 if you want to follow along. Peter is kind of the most well-known character of the story. Peter's one of the leaders of the early church. Christ has died and He rose again. He's ascended back to heaven, and the church it's growing and it's multiplying. And what has happened is the gospel is jumping over boundaries and barriers between Jew and Gentile, ethnic barriers, where it was once somewhat confined primarily to a Jewish context. It is now exploding globally. And people of different backgrounds and different languages are coming to faith. And the early church leaders, Peter in particular, is struggling with this. Because all of his life he's kept God's law. And now there are people supposedly coming to faith who don't keep any of those laws. The ceremonial laws are going away, and Peter's in this transition period. Now, some of you may know that in Acts 10, Peter has this vision from God. He sees a sheet come down from heaven, and it's full of animals that Peter would call unclean. We don't eat them, we don't touch them, because if we're unclean, we can't go worship. And so we avoid these animals. And in his dream, God says to Peter, get up, kill, and eat. Pete, have a barbecue sandwich, buddy. Eat some ribs. Sausage is really good, Pete. And Peter says, surely not. No way. I'm not doing that. And God says, no. The ceremonial laws, they're done. And Luke tells us like 3 times they have this back and forth. Can't do it. Do it. Can't do it. Eat some sausage. Can't do it. Have a biscuit. Go ahead. And then Peter, after having a vision from God, the Bible tells us Pete's still confused. It tells us as he's coming out of the vision in verse 17, while Peter was wondering about the vision. Right? He has a vision from God. And we know the vision is not just about food. The vision is about people. Hey, Pete, people that you think are unclean and outsiders, they're coming into the kingdom and you better get ready for it. Like, this is the underlying message. You better get ready, Pete, because people that you didn't think could get in are going to be getting in. And I'm trying to get you ready. Pete has this vision. You and I would say, and if I had a vision, I'd believe it. I wish God would give me a vision. I wish God would speak to me like He spoke to Peter. God spoke to Peter. God gave him a vision. Right after it, Peter's still wondering what it was all about. He's trying to figure it out. Like, I don't know. What did that mean? Now, if the vision is here, I'll give you a timeline. God bookends the vision with relationships. Last verse in chapter 9. Peter, Acts 9:43. Peter stayed in Joppa for some time with a tanner named Simon. So that's before the vision. Peter shows up. Peter stays for some time with Simon the tanner. Simon the tanner's mentioned 3 times. He's mentioned 3 times, all within this story. I'm going to give you all 3 times. Acts 10:6. Peter is staying with Simon the tanner, whose house is by the sea. Acts 10:32. Send to Joppa for Simon, who is called Peter. He is a guest in the house of Simon the tanner, who lives by the sea. And if you're of a certain age, you hear lives by the sea and you think of Puff the Magic Dragon, don't you? I know that's totally distracting, but it just lives by the sea, goes with Puff the Magic Dragon. Simon's mentioned 3 times. All 3 times he's called Simon the tanner. Simon the tanner, Simon the tanner, Simon the tanner. Twice we're told he lives by the sea with Puff the Magic Dragon. Yes. Why? You know what a tanner does? They work with animal skins, dead animal skins. It is against the law. It makes you unclean to touch a dead body, including a dead animal. Simon the tanner, by virtue of what he did, was perpetually unclean, cannot go to worship. Nobody should be around him, because if you're around him, you are unclean and you can't go to worship. Simon the tanner, perpetually unclean. Pete stayed with him for some time. The passage tells us he lived by the sea, which is another way of saying he was an outsider. He was an outsider. Being a tanner, dealing with dead animals, smells really bad. And the HOA said, we don't want you in our subdivision. Go live by the sea. And maybe the salt water was a part of the tanning process, but there was a breeze by the sea, and so the stench of dead animals would blow away. You go live over there. We don't want you to live here. You're an outsider. Pete, I want you to go to the home of Simon the tanner, and I want you to stay there for a while. I want you to meet him. I want you to get to know this guy that you would normally call unclean. I want you to live with him for a while. Now, on this side of the timeline, we meet a guy by the name of Cornelius. Acts chapter 10, verse 1. At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion in what was known as the Italian regiment. We know Cornelius is a Gentile. There's debate over whether Simon was Jewish or Gentile. It's a long story. We know Cornelius is a Gentile, outside of the Jewish people. Cornelius has a vision from God. God says, guy's name's Peter, staying at Simon the tanner's house in Joppa, send some guys to go get him. So he sends guys to get Peter. Pete's having the vision, and at the end of the vision, God says, there's some guys downstairs here to get you. Go with them. Doesn't tell him who the guys are. God doesn't tell Peter what it's all about. Guys downstairs, go wherever they say go. Peter goes downstairs, follows these guys to Cornelius's house. So he spent some time with Simon the tanner, who's unclean. Peter would have rejected. He's been in relationship with Simon the tanner. Goes to Cornelius's house, who's a Gentile. Peter would never have associated before. Acts chapter 10, verses 27 through 29. Peter shows up and begins to have a conversation with Cornelius. While talking with him, Peter went inside and found a large gathering of people. He said to them, you are well aware that it is against our law for a Jew to associate with or visit a Gentile, but God has shown me that I should not call anyone impure or unclean. So when I was sent for, I came without raising any objection. May I ask why you sent for me? I know it's always dangerous to read emotion into the Bible and intent into the Bible. But I feel like at this point, Peter's saying what he's just supposed to say. It feels to me robotic and strained. You are well aware that it is against our law for a Jew to associate with or visit a Gentile. That's a great way to start a conversation, isn't it? Somebody starts a conversation with, I don't really want to talk to you, but. That's not a great way to start a conversation. You know God doesn't want me talking to you. But I've heard it's okay. But God has shown me that I should not call anyone impure or unclean. See, I think Pete knows the words to say. He knows what he's supposed to say. He's not feeling it yet, though. So Cornelius answers his question, why did you send for me? And Cornelius said, well, I was in prayer. I was praying to God just like you do. I was praying. And as I was praying, a man in bright clothes stood in front of me. And he told me your name, who I've never met before. He told me the house you were staying at. And told me that if I would go get you, you could come teach us more about God. Peter saw this happen in a person. He saw this happen in a real live human being. And notice what Peter says in verse 34. Then Peter began to speak. I now realize how true it is that God does not show favoritism, but accepts from every nation the one who fears him and does what is right. I now realize. I now get it. When was now? Now was after living with an unclean person for some time. Now was after looking into the eyes of a Gentile and hearing that God gave him a vision too, and God was at work in his life too, and God was doing something in his life. Now was looking out at a room full of people. Cornelius had invited all of his family and all of his friends. They're sitting there waiting to hear from Peter. Peter could not deny what he saw in another person. He could argue with God about the vision. He could argue with God about the revelation. No, God, I'm not supposed to do that. He could keep wondering, what was God trying to say? What was God trying to say? Until he saw another human being and heard their story and listened to their desire to know God and heard how God spoke to them. He saw it in real people and he finally got it. Look, he didn't get it in some abstract principle form. He didn't get it when it was in some abstract theological form. He didn't get it when it was written down for him. He got it when he saw it in another person. When his life was next to another person, he figured it out. Listen, some of us know the words. We know the answers. Maybe we read our Bibles. Maybe we have our quiet time. Wonderful. You should do that. We read our favorite Christian authors alone in our house. Wonderful. Read Christian authors, some of them. We listen to our favorite podcasts by our favorite pastor, teacher, author. Wonderful. That's wonderful. There is a part of what God wants to do in you that he can only do in relationships. There just is. For Peter, the relationship was the lesson. That was the lesson. He didn't get the vision. He didn't understand the vision. The relationship was the lesson. That's why God bookends the vision with the relationship. I want you to hang out with Simon the tanner long enough that your heart starts to soften. I want you to meet Cornelius, a Gentile that you would never hang out with, long enough until you begin to realize, I am at work here. Peter wouldn't get it without relationship. We have the ability, by virtue of the day and age that we live in, we have the ability to develop a spiritual life apart from relationships. We just do. Again, you can read the Bible on your own. You should. You can listen to podcasts on your own. That's fine. You can read Christian authors. That's fine. We have the ability to develop a spiritual framework, theology, life, all by ourselves. And if you do, you will never grow in some of the ways God wants to grow you. You will never become all that God wants you to become if you try to do it by yourself. Not only that, there will be areas you will develop the wrong theology, the wrong spirituality, the wrong spiritual disciplines, the wrong spiritual principles. If your faith, if your belief, if your convictions, if your doctrine, if your theology never has to bounce up against the face of another human being, you're going to eventually arrive at some wrong conclusions about God. You just are. If you're doing it all on your own, and you're never sitting with a group of people, walking life together, and hearing, like Cornelius, hearing what God's doing in their life, and hearing how God used that in their life, seeing a shade of God in their life that you haven't seen in your life because you haven't walked to their experiences. Seeing a perspective of God that you've never seen before because they traveled a different road than you traveled. Maybe some of those things that you've been so dogmatic about, when you bounce it up against a real human being, you realize, I probably should rethink that a little bit. See, when you and I develop our spirituality devoid of relationship, our spirituality can be just what I think it should be. And I know the pushback. It's coming from the Bible. I'm just reading the Bible. Please. You're reading it through your lens and your eyes and your life only. And you're going to get a lot of it right. God's word is clear in many things. You're going to get a lot of it right. But if you're not in community, if you're not hearing somebody else's story, if you're not hearing how that thing that you're so dogmatic about bounces up against somebody else's life, you're going to arrive in some wrong conclusions about who God is. The relationship is the lesson. It is the lesson. It's part of what God is trying to use to teach us and to grow us. And I just want to encourage you. If God went to such relational lengths to make sure Peter understood this, He wants to do that for you too. Like He wants to speak to you. He wants to show you things in His Word. He wants to give you private moments, individual moments where you read His Word and it comes alive. But He also wants you to look into the eyes of real human people. And through that community, through that relationship, for God to show you things that a vision can never show you, and text can never show you, and you by yourself can never figure out. It's a challenge because we live in the age of isolation. We live in the age of just me. And God, historically, talked about this earlier, I'm not going to do it again. Historically, God has worked groups, people These people are together. These are my people. This is my nation. This is my church. These are my disciples. He formed spirituality consistently in relationships. It takes effort. I agree. It takes all kind, inward and outward. It takes effort. But you're not going to be the person God deeply desires for you to be if you aren't walking in relationship with other people who are seeking God with you. There's no song at the end today. Ian's going to come send us out in just a minute. But I'm going to pray. And I want you to seek the Lord for what is the effort that you need to make. We're not perfect at it on our end as a church. We are constantly trying to get better. I told you last week, this is the topic our staff talks about probably more than any other. How do we reach new people and connect them? People here at our, we're working on our end. What is the make every effort on your end? God, remind us that you do work in relationship. Sometimes the relationship is the lesson. And apart from bringing our lives, submitting our lives in relationship, we will miss some of what you want to teach us. We will not find it all ourselves. We will not understand all sides of an issue by ourselves. We just won't. We are not capable of that. We are not omniscient or omnipresent like you are. That's why we need each other. We need not just revelation, as Peter got, but for the one revelation, he got multiple relationships that helped him understand your work. We are the same. Help us to obey you. In Jesus' name, amen.